Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. As people join in the webinar here, we'll get started fairly quickly. We'll give it one more minute, but thanks for being here. All right, I'm going to get us started as folks continue to join the webinar because, as usual, excuse me, we have a really robust agenda to get through today. Thank you again for joining us. I'm Lynanne Gutierrez, and I'm the Assistant Director and Legal Counsel at Groundwork Ohio. Groundwork Ohio is the state early childhood advocacy organization whose mission is to champion high-quality early learning and healthy development strategies from the prenatal period to age 5. That lay a strong foundation for Ohio kids, families, and communities. A few housekeeping reminders. You are on mute. I cannot see you, but I hope you can see me and the slide presentation we have in front of you. If you have questions, please put them in the box, or if you just want to say hello, I see a couple of you providing some shout outs. We love to see who's here, and please share your thoughts and questions throughout the presentation, and we'll be able to review those afterwards. We likely won't have time to respond to specific questions in today's agenda, but we'll be able to respond to you as quickly as we can. So in that instance, if you have a question, please also include your email address in the chat box so we can follow up. We hope you'll share us on social media today, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, at Groundwork Ohio. If you want to show your support during and after this event, or if you are inspired by something you hear today from one of our panelists and want to share with your networks, please we encourage you to do that. So I want to share some background with you of how we got to bring this new report to you today, drafting a new blueprint for success. And it really was out of this report cover here you see in front of us, From the Ground Up, Unearthing Fairness for Ohio Kids. So Groundwork Ohio set out to engage in an intentional equity dialogue with policymakers and stakeholders back in 2018 and more deeply understand how Ohio's child health and education systems are addressing or failing to address the needs of our most at-risk children, specifically children of color and those who live in rural Appalachia. Our organization has long recognized the disparities across our state and advanced early childhood investments as targeted evidence-based strategies to try and create a fair playing field for children living in poverty, children of color, and children living in rural communities. The public-facing work, however, our intentional commitment to advancing equitable outcomes for young children began in the writing of our first report published back in July of 2018. And what we learned from the ground up confirmed our experience as we did a thorough evaluation of the data. From the ground up, the Ohio Race and Rural Equity Report provided a baseline of information to educate and inspire conversation among community stakeholders and policymakers about the stark disparities in child health and education outcomes and access to the programs that seek to eliminate these disparities. The compelling story, bolstered by 26 metrics across the child's life, from prenatal care to post-secondary attainment, exposed a more complete story of what it means to be a young child in Ohio. It illustrated how the color of your skin and where you live determine where you start in life and often where you stay. Children who start behind stay behind. We know that too many children are not surviving until their first birthday, that too many children are not getting the early intervention that can prevent a lifetime of problems, first in school, then on the job and in life. We know too many children are starting kindergarten woefully behind, and families are being denied the chance to succeed at work and become self-sufficient because they can't afford quality childcare or it's just not available. We can give kids a better childhood and ultimately better lives if we invest when it matters most, when their brains are developing the fastest, when supporting families and treating health issues can have the most impact and be done the most cost effectively. The first years are indeed the most important. We know that 80% of brain growth is happening by the age of 3, and that low-income children at the kindergarten entry level are up to 2 years behind their higher income peers. And considering the impact of poverty among young children, that is very stark. We look at 1 in 4 young children living in poverty across the state of Ohio. That increases to 1 in 3 Appalachian children, where we see concentrated poverty in that region, and more than 1 in 2 Black children across the state of Ohio living in poverty. When we view these gaps that begin early, leaving lower income children up to 2 years behind, we find that too often a child's race, their family's income, or the zip code they live in determines how they'll do in life. Gaps that show up even before a child starts school too often persist and even widen year after year, regardless of the outcome measure you're looking at. Gaps between children in poverty and their higher income peers emerge much earlier than our state and federal policy recognize and persist long into adulthood. Concentrated poverty of children in Ohio's rural Appalachian region is obstinate, and barriers to overcoming the impacts in this region are unique. And finally, a child's race tells a distinct and critical narrative that must be examined separately to fully understand the problem. In other words, the impact of poverty alone does not tell the full story of how these gaps persist and even grow among Black children during their childhood and into their life. Black children, even those who are poor, are too often not achieving at the rate of their white peers. We have to examine the impact of structural racism on our youngest children and families and the systems that serve them. The report, Drafting a New Blueprint for Success, is a reflection of our learnings and engagement thus far to advance an equity dialogue and a renewed promise to continue doing so in the future. We are proud to share it with you today, so let's dive in. Over the past couple of years, we engaged with over 1,000 folks across the state to inform and bring deeper understanding to this data story that I shared with you before. The language we use and our understanding of the difference between equity and equality remain foundational. So I just want to share that with you again today to ground our conversation. Every child has unique assets and barriers to healthy development and builds their foundation in different environments. So when a child faces challenges throughout their life, the strength of their foundation matters the most. If you can imagine that these homes are children in a community and that each is positioned differently on this hill, when they face challenges or weather a storm, if you will, you can see that equality does not close the gap in their relative position or experience. Equality is giving everyone the same thing. But it's clear here and for our youngest children and families that everyone does not need the same. For instance, the house at the bottom of the hill, even with given the same foundation, is still underwater. And of course, when your home is flooding, you can't worry about the light bulb out upstairs or the creaky bathroom floor. If we gave every child what they need to succeed and target our efforts to build their foundation up in the earliest years, they would be better able to weather the storm. On the next slide, the white house at the top of the hill was always going to be okay when the rain started coming down. The purple house here needed some additional support, and it's the orange house where our most resources should be focused. This response advances equity because it responds to the unique needs of children in consideration of their situation and environment. So we traveled from Columbus to Dayton to Cincinnati, Akron, Cleveland, Toledo, the Mahoning Valley, and across the Appalachian region to engage in a conversation about equity for our youngest children and families with you. We shared in a continuum of formats of events with local partners, including implicit bias training, advocacy training, historical trauma training, large community events and small, intimate gatherings of stakeholders in public venues in the city, or a small rural library. We brought with us the story our state and local disaggregated data tell for our most vulnerable kids and facilitated a dialogue on what equity means for young children in your communities. You brought life and lived experience to that data, shaping our understanding of equity for Ohio's youngest children and through the work you do and the stories you shared. And we listened as you reflected on your community. You were proud of its strengths and forthright about the barriers it's created to young children living up to their full potential. You made a sincere commitment with us to act and change these systems. Next, we're going to play a short video capturing some of the voices we heard. The first voice is of Billy Osborne Sears, the executive director of Starting Point in Northeast Ohio. Billy recently passed away, and we lost a fierce child advocate. And for those of you who had the honor of working with her, we share in your loss. And we count it as a gift that she supported our work, and we have her voice captured in this video.
I'm very concerned, certainly about the academic achievement gaps when we begin to look at Black children and white children. It's a serious issue, and it has been going on too long.
The narrative is that families, especially Black families, who are struggling don't care, and that's the reason why they're struggling, and that's simply not true.
Higher income Black students are still behind lower income white students.
What's the difference between the environment that a lot of my low income African American students are in that's different than their higher income white counterparts? Do the higher income white counterpart school districts have a smaller class size? You know, does that impact how they test?
We see families of color who are going to extraordinary lengths to do the right things for their children, working 3 or 4 jobs, you know, taking multiple buses across the city to get to a high quality site. They're working hard.
We need to have everybody at the table knowing that there are gaps that have been created, and we need to attack those gaps and chunk away at it piece by piece, bit by bit.
When we really want to consider how to make everything equitable, we have to start with our attitudes, and we have to start with our own biases.
What structures are in place that need to change in order to truly give every child an equal opportunity? What is it that we're not talking about that is holding them back?
So I hope that video gives you a feel for our activity across the state, and we view part of this report as really being a testament to the community's willingness to engage with us, so thank you. As part of this follow-up report, you know, we're taking additional measurements. The initial early childhood race and rural equity report explored 26 metrics from prenatal care to post-secondary attainment. And just so you know, we had only initially committed to looking at 11 metrics, but you could understand that as we had more information, we only had more questions, and we wanted to expand our scope substantially to ensure that we could explore these metrics and dig deeper to tell a more complete story. And as our work has really been an ongoing exploration of what it means to be a young child, a young Black child and a young child living in rural Appalachia, this report was no different. We wanted to take some additional measurements and see where we're at. As the report was shared across the state, many community discussions highlighted some of these additional metrics that really were looking at the social determinants of health. So we're taking a closer look at some of these in this report. The social determinants of health are the conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age, as well as the complex interrelated social structures and economic systems that shape these conditions. There are several hard-hitting indicators here in our report of social determinants, which I really view as creating a web of these interconnected factors, or the connected tissue among those initial 26 metrics we looked at. We view these social determinants as the social determinants of early childhood. And the bottom line data really provide a deeper understanding of the circumstances that perpetuate disparate outcomes. They're another snapshot of how systemic racism and structural inequalities are perpetuated in every system that serves children and families in Ohio. Our early childhood advocacy leaders are more prepared than ever to draft a new blueprint for success. What we've learned with you and from you over the past year has informed our work moving forward. And perhaps most importantly, our commitment that began as more of a project or a report is now integrated into everything we do as we advocate for equitable early childhood policies and investments in Ohio. And while COVID-19 has accelerated our work and required us to be vigilant in pivoting strategies and tactics to ensure we're doing the next right thing for kids, our foundational understanding of early childhood equity in this state over the past couple of years continues to inform everything we do. So here is really the heart of the report we're releasing and sharing with you today. It's what we've learned. So the first learning we have is that we have to start earlier. If we're going to hold ourselves accountable to the science of early childhood development, we have to continue to target policy and investments in the first five years of life, but also really focus specifically on that prenatal to 3 space to stop gaps where they begin, because we know they emerge far before kindergarten and even before birth. Our state and nation have made some incredible progress over the last decade in understanding the science of early childhood development, and we really just need to apply that to our work relentlessly and look at our infants and toddlers and pregnant women from a racial equity lens, and also understand how our systems treat our youngest children, even among our 0 to 5 population, our infants and toddlers differently, and how and why they have unique needs that we need to respond to. All right, our second learning is that we have to support the early education and health professions. We have always been a very child-focused advocacy organization, and we will absolutely continue to be. But in recognition that all of the interventions in the first 5 years of life and the supports that families need are reliant on high-quality interpersonal responsive relationships with qualified and skilled adults. We have to support those adults in the room who are really making heroic efforts daily, for which we've seen, again, day after day during this pandemic. And they're oftentimes doing that without the respect and resources they deserve, despite the great burden and responsibility that they carry for our youngest children. Our third learning also focuses on the adults in children's lives, and that is parents, caregivers, and families. And we, as an organization, have learned that we have to put family voice at the center of our policy development. It is critical when it comes to improving early childhood programs and achieving better outcomes for kids that parents are at and caregivers are at the decision-making table for what is deeply personal to them and their families. They are their child's first and most important caregivers, and we have to elevate their voices to meet their needs. And so we look forward to accelerating our family and parent voice-centered work in our work moving forward. Our fourth learning is that we have to be relentless in collecting data and measuring progress. That's something that we've been really strong at ever since we first released that initial report back in 2018. But we have to continue to use it to measure and hold our state accountable to progress. Where data is available, we have to work to support the collection of metrics that reflect the experience of our youngest children. And if they aren't being measured, progress isn't being made. And this is particularly important when we look at data disaggregated by race or by age or even by location of where our children and families live. We will continue to commit to disaggregating data wherever possible and advocating for increased access to data where it's currently not being measured. We don't feel that success can be celebrated unless it's shared equitably among our youngest and most vulnerable children, and we have to have ways to make ourselves accountable to that. And I hope that you see that in our work over time. The initial report had focused on regions, a handful of urban regions across the state, and then also the Appalachian region. And since then, we've done our best to continue to provide data at the county level and at the city level where possible. Our next learning was that we have to engage in cross-sector work and invest in new partnerships to deepen our understanding and influence on social determinants. We are committed to engaging and expanding our relationships with stakeholders and allies that can collaborate in meaningful cross-sector work. And in order to serve the whole child and their family, we really just have to model our advocacy and policy development to reflect what we want to see in our systems. Collaboration and that recognition that regardless of metric or program, we're so often serving the same children who have complex needs. And our final learning can be captured in this quote: "I can't believe what you say because I see what you do." And while we really started as a very small team at Groundwork in leading this work and have grown over the past couple of years, we continue to have to model internally the outcomes and behaviors we seek internally. And that means our internal governance and staff, in addition to our policy and advocacy initiatives and stakeholder engagement, have to transparently reflect the principle of equity. It's not sufficient to demand that of our policymakers and ask them to view their work through an equity lens if we're not willing to constantly challenge our own organizational biases and practice allyship. The future of Ohio's youngest children is in our hands, and we are humbled by this responsibility and will continue to challenge our organization, our vast network of stakeholders, to return to the drawing board, challenge our assumptions, and think creatively and collaboratively to advance equitable outcomes for young children. A couple of ways that we're acting on all of our learnings that I shared with you include our new, recently relaunched Ready, Set, Soar Ohio initiative. Ready, Set, Soar Ohio is a diverse statewide coalition of early childhood education, health, advocacy, philanthropy, and business organizations, community leaders, policymakers, and families. This coalition is committed to ensuring that more pregnant women, infants, and toddlers, that prenatal to 3 early, most important part of a child's life, have access to the support they need to be ready, set, and soar to their full potential. So we ask you on the next slide, the website is www.readysetsoarohio.org. We ask you to join us in that work, and we hope you find yourself in our robust agenda that we've set to better serve pregnant women, infants, and toddlers. And equity was a guiding principle and continues to be a guiding principle of this work. And another way that we're delving deeper is into the Ohio early childhood workforce. We'll be releasing a report later this month. The work was led by Julia Honer in our office that looks more deeply at what it means to be an early childhood educator in the state of Ohio. Here you can see just a sample of the comparable wages of the adults we entrust with our community's greatest responsibility up against that of a parking lot attendant. Our professionals, our children, and families demand better. We look forward to sharing with you how we're beginning to center families and parent voice into our work, implementing a deeper understanding of the social determinants of early childhood, examining new data and measuring progress, and how our organization is continuing to sow a foundation of equity among our staff, leadership, and stakeholders over the coming year. So I'll wrap up my comments. It's been an honor to lead some of this work at Groundwork Ohio. And the first quote you see on this slide: "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." That's a quote from James Baldwin, who is a Black activist, and I'm sure you may have seen a lot of his words being used in the past months to describe kind of the sentiment of the moment and the fight for racial justice. But this first quote was published in our initial 26 metric report, and we really believed at Groundwork that if we could face what needed to be changed, then there was hope to change it. And we really set out to tell that complete story to do so. And I really have seen this work and the commitment of our stakeholders over time and engaging with us, which is reflected in this new report we've released with you today. And I find that work to be really encapsulated by this quote: "The world changes according to the way people see it. And if you alter, even by a millimeter, the way people look at reality, then you can change it." So thank you for joining us here today. And we have an incredible panel that will help us continue to change the way we think and help us understand how we can change policy and advance equitable outcomes in Ohio. So As the public health and economic devastation of COVID-19 has ravaged the state and the nation, it is laid bare and yet again confirmed that the public systems that are supposed to protect the most vulnerable among us are often undermining these same children, families, and citizens. The failure to view policy choices and systems building with an equity lens has resulted in our systems affirming and even exacerbating the racial and geographic disparities that have been perpetuated for decades by institutional racism and structural inequities. It's more important than ever for us to work with our policymakers and support each other in applying an equity lens to our shared work for kids and families. And here to help us explore this are three outstanding Ohio policymakers who have a wealth of knowledge and experience, especially in the health and human services and child-focused policy. We're joined by Senator Nickie Antonio, Representative Erica Crawley, and Senator Dave Burke. And I am just, I hope you can still hear me, but you may not be able to see me, but I'm going to go ahead and continue on with our panel. So in the structure of this panel, I'm going to ask each panelist to answer the same question, and they'll have 3 minutes to do so in what's an opening statement where we really would like you to share who you are and what equity means to you and how you view the role of equity in your work as a policymaker, and would encourage you to share if there's an experience as a policymaker or in your career that has inspired or underscored the role of equity in your work. So I'm going to start with Senator Antonio first, and then we'll turn to Representative Crawley and Senator Burke. Senator Antonio?
Well, thank you. Thanks, Lynn, for so much for inviting me here today. It's always a joy to work with the folks at Groundwork and all of the providers across the state. So, and it looks like there's quite a few of them on this call today. So I want to thank you all for the work that you do on behalf of our children and families across the state of Ohio. My name is Nickie Antonio. I'm in my 2nd year as a senator. And before that, I served 8 years in the House. And it's been an incredible journey for me. My role, one of the questions to us was, how do you view the role of equity as a policymaker? And I have to say that I think my role, I believe my role is to be a bridge and a conduit through public policy work for all of those. So those who don't have the opportunity to have equity in their lives, one day may be able to not only experience that balancing act that comes with adjusting for the needs that they have, but actually experience what equality feels like, looks like, and is available in their lives, because we have far too many people who don't have that opportunity right now. And it's due to policies and the resources that are available that can make that happen. And so I take that role of as a policymaker very seriously. You know, I was thinking about what kinds of experiences led me on this path or have really influenced my work, and there've been a lot. But the one that stands out for me as I thought about this was I was the director of a women's center in the 90s in Cleveland. And we saw women struggling with all kinds of issues, chemical dependency issues. They were seeking treatment for both drugs and alcohol. But also we provided linkages for domestic violence services, for rape crisis work, and maternal and infant access to resources that way. And so one of the things I realized in working there and dealing with a population that was, it was very eclectic. We had women, there's a large Hispanic population in Cleveland, so many of the women came to the center. We had bilingual services, also women who were African American and Appalachian women who had came to Cleveland and had put down roots there. What I saw over and over again was these barriers. How hard, you mentioned a little bit about how hard it is just to get to, 2 buses and and a 10-block walk to be able to access services for your children, or to be able to get your child to daycare and then go on to work. We saw that over and over again. The barriers that were put in place, what I saw as the executive director of the program was that many of those barriers were grounded in public policy. And I got very frustrated. And I know that the first time I ever thought about, how do I fix this? How do I make this? How do I be involved in the work to changing these policies that aren't working for these women and their families? I realized was grounded first at the local level and then at the state level. And it was about budget, and it was about policies for change. And so I know that the work that I did at the Women's Center really influenced me to have the motivation to run. And I'm lucky because I still hear from some of the women who were there. And I know that the work that we do together can make such a difference, but we still have a long way to go.
Thank you, Senator Antonio and Lenan, and great to see you, State Senator Burke. It is a pleasure to be with you all. Thank you for inviting me on this panel, and I just want to say thank you to all of our providers out there that are working really hard on behalf of children and families. You really are making a difference and an impact in the lives of the people that you serve, and I am grateful for you all. My name is Erica Crowley. I am a state representative representing Ohio's 26th House District, which is here in East and Southeast Columbus. I am in my first term, ending my first term, running for my second term in the Ohio House. And it has been an experience and a roller coaster being here in the legislature, but have been able to hit the ground running on some meaningful work. And so I guess I'll kind of start out answering the question about what has inspired this, or my passion to do equity work. And I would say it's my life and my lived experiences and the work that I have done prior to me coming into the legislature. So before I came into the legislature, I went to law school later in life as a non-traditional student. Before I went to law school, most of my work has been in the early child care setting. So I worked on behalf of child care centers, helping them get accredited on a national level. I worked with the Black Child Development Institute, the Atlanta affiliate. I worked with the YMCA Head Start Early Head Start program as a partnership coordinator, working with families, recruiting them into the program. And then as a health coordinator, making sure that our babies had, their vision and hearing screenings, vaccinations, and then also identified some children who may have had some developmental delays. And even as a health coordinator, I was still working with families, providing resources or being a facilitator, helping them get connected with the services that they needed in the community. I then went on to work with CASA, or the Court Appointed Special Advocates for Children. While I was at the Y, I volunteered for 2 years with CASA as a volunteer, working with children who have been abused and neglected, providing court reports and representing the best interest of kids. And then after I left the Y, the CASA asked me would I come on full time, and I did, and I recruited volunteers and still, advocated on behalf of children and families, and really tried to represent the children's best interest as well as I could, as well as be a mentor. And then when I came into law school, I volunteered with PHI-Law, the Family, Youth, and Law Center with Capital University Law School, still doing work on behalf of children who are in the foster care system. And so I am a single parent of twin girls, Hope and Faith. They are now 16. And so I think as I came into the legislature, I really wanted to make sure that I brought the voices of my community and had them be amplified in the State House, but then also brought my experiences to say, hey, as the only single parent in the legislature, there are some things that are different and unique that I think people don't necessarily consider or take into consideration because it's not their lived experience. And so I bring that with me, as well as the voices of my neighbors. And so one of the things that I think has come up since I've been here too. The example that you gave, Lynn, about taking 2 buses or having to transfer to get to places, or whether dropping kids off and going to school or going to work. I had a conversation last year with someone and they were like, well, what if we just provided bus passes to families so they could, get around, and that would alleviate a transportation burden. And I was like, it wouldn't for me, as a single parent who had twin girls as infants, trying to, because I was a college dropout when I had them, going back to school to get my education. It would have been very difficult for me to go travel maybe a mile with a stroller with twins, pack that up, try to lug it onto the bus to drop them off at childcare, then for me to get to work or to school, then to try to pick them up again. That in and of itself is a burden. And so when we talk about alleviating barriers to children and families, I think I can bring another perspective, because I am the people that I advocate for. And so, I've also worked on a lot of legislation. I know we'll probably get into it later on with birthing people, or making sure that we address our maternal and infant mortality in a way that really addresses equity, and acknowledging that we have women who go into a healthcare system that does not treat them fairly and equitably. So as we talk about access to healthcare, it's not just insurance. We have to talk about access to providers who understand the circumstances and the unique experiences that women, especially women of color, have. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Representative, and we're glad to have you here as well. Senator Burke?
Well, thank you for having me on today. I'm State Senator Dave Burke. I represent the 26th Senate District, which is 7 counties. They're all rural: Union, Marion, Morrow, Wyandotte, Crawford, and Seneca and Sandusky counties. So fairly vast area. As I like to say, in the real world, I'm a pharmacist. My wife and I are both pharmacists, and we own a drugstore here in Marysville, Ohio. So got into the General Assembly as a way of public service, right? Taking, like Representative Crawley said, your personal experiences and using them down in Columbus. And when I started in the Ohio House, that came to fruition what was called the Pill Mill Bill, right? But you never know what the future is going to hold. And to the point of this topic, it's led to some amazing things. What does equality mean to me? I'm always willing to learn about new issues. And I think the hardest thing for a legislator to learn about are issues to which you haven't been exposed. So growing up in what is definitely a rural district, I grew up in Marion, Ohio, which I guess you could say is probably the most metropolitan of my entire Senate district. Marysville, of course, a small town of 25,000. It's hard to understand what goes on in big cities, right? When you don't live there, you can visit them, but it's hard to understand what goes on there. But my call to action to link that together is the fact that I'm adopted. I was born in Cincinnati and adopted at 3 months of age to Marion, right? So went through what was a single teenage mother who in 1967 gave me up to adoption through Catholic Social Services, a little foster care, ended up in Marion. My mantra has always been, and we live in a great state, make no mistake, everyone should start at an equal setting, right? The race of life should put every child and adult when they graduate high school at the same starting block. But it doesn't really work that way all the time. And depending on where you come from, that's definitely not the case. So I take even my example, right, where my life could have taken many turns and ended up completely differently. And I look what other people deal with across the state. And to me, that is probably something I find very troubling, because we live in a great country and in a state that I love dearly that has rewarded me, right, for my efforts, but yet other people don't get there. So I think it's having the courage to look at things outside of your own world and understand why other people don't have those opportunities. And to be honest with you, that takes a little bit of strength. It takes a little bit of humility, but I think it takes courage. Also have to say something I don't understand, so I can serving everyone in this have the same opportunity I've had. So kind of a unique call to action in the subject matter, but one I'm very proud of, because again, when I see the things that this state has to offer people, the number one question is, why doesn't everybody take advantage of it? And the answers are unique.
I'm sorry, everyone.
There she is.
Some technical issues, but I hope you can hear me even though you can't see me. I was saying so much, I was expressing my gratitude and thanking the panel. We've found, certainly as we've traveled across the state, that it is hard to talk about equity without also in a strictly professional sense, in terms of your professional role and duty, and how you view your work as a policymaker. You all sharing your personal stories, your lived experience, is really a testament to what we've heard across the state, and appreciate you experiencing or sharing those experiences with us today. So given your understanding and experience, let's talk about how this translates to policy. In consideration of the current movement for racial justice and what we know and continue to learn about the disparate impacts of our existing child serving systems in the wake of COVID-19, I'm going to ask each panelist a different question specifically addressed to them with a few minutes to respond. And I'm going to start with you, Representative Crawley. Can you share how you're leading to advance equitable outcomes for pregnant women, infants and toddlers, and young children? I know you started to share with us some in the first question, but I'd love for you to share with our audience your leadership and the specific policies that you're advancing.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. I think especially when we talk about equity as a policymaker, I have to look at how we have codified discrimination and the barriers that have gotten in the way that makes it so everyone isn't even, playing at the same level, and that keeps some of our communities behind. So I think one of the things that people say all the time is, oh, people just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, or Black people just need to work harder, and that's making the assumption that everybody has boots to even start with, which isn't always the case. And so since I've been in the legislature, one of the things, or some of the things that I've been working on most recently is introducing House Concurrent Resolution 31, which is declaring racism as a public health crisis. And over the past year, as we've been dealing with COVID and the social unrest, it really has, racism has been at the forefront and really trying to, address it. And we can't make change until we address it head on. And so my co-sponsor, or my joint sponsor, Representative Stephanie House, and I introduced that in the House. There's a concurrent resolution in the Senate. They have made much more progress than we have over in the Senate, having hearings where we haven't had none in the House. And in HCR 31, while we're declaring racism as a public health crisis, we are addressing how we have codified discrimination with redlining. So, people of color couldn't purchase property in certain neighborhoods, or they were restricted to living in certain neighborhoods, which, as we see the health outcomes, has contributed to why we see disparities in health outcomes. It also talks about law enforcement violence being a public health crisis, and how that has a health impact on communities, especially communities of color, education, and how education funding, our funding formula has been unconstitutional for several years, and how that has a disproportionate impact on different communities. And in HCR 31, we talk about maternal and infant health, and how Ohio has one of the highest rates of infant mortality in the country. And we've made some strides and put a lot of resources behind it, but we really have not targeted the disparities like your report address, where we really need to target resources to the places that need the most help and would give us the most benefit for the outcomes that we would like to see. And so with that, I've also introduced several pieces of legislation around maternal and infant health, like House Bill 434, which is the Pregnancy Associated Mortality Review Board. I was able to get an amendment in the operating budget to codify PMR, but I have a piece of legislation that really puts some teeth to data and disaggregating the data and really identifying the direct and indirect causes of maternal deaths. We had a pregnancy-related death rate of 56%, which said that 56% of our the deaths were preventable out of the, I think, 180 something deaths total. That's heart-wrenching to know that women died either giving birth or a year after, and we could have done something about it. And so I also have House Bill 435, which is Save Our Mothers Act. And what that does is help us get to an AIM state. And AIM is the maternal patient safety bundles. It's the Alliance for Innovation in Maternal Health. And the patient safety bundles really helps doctors and nurses treat some of the issues that come up, like severe hemorrhage and diabetes and things of that nature, vascular issues that women have, that they experience and ultimately have complications from that may lead to death. We see that the states that have become AIM states have really decreased their maternal mortality rate and infant mortality rate, some by 50%. And then I have House Bill 620, which is health and equity in all policies. Just like we have fiscal impact statements for every piece of legislation that we introduce and how it impacts the state, health and equity in all policies requires that there's health impact statements to say whether it has a positive impact, a negative impact, or a neutral impact on different communities. So we as legislators can be better informed about the legislation that we are proposing and trying to introduce in the law and how it will have an impact before, you know, it goes into law, and then we see how it might have had some unintended consequences that we weren't prepared for. And then I have House Bill 611, which is Medicaid reimbursement for doulas. If we are going to really support infants and children from cradle to career, then we have to make sure that they can, you know, get here and get here safely, and mothers don't die in the process and babies don't die after their birth. And so House Bill 611 really provides access to doulas to be part of the birthing team, where we know across the state where there's been studies, when women have access to doula services, even though they provide emotional support and some health care and medical support, they really provide just, you know, resources to community workers who are, you know, providing other services, but reassurance. And they are usually ones that can help identify complications early because they see the birthing person more frequently and more often than their doctor, and they can help them, you know, really understand what their body is going through. And since Medicaid pays for more than 50% of the births in the state, we know that if we have Medicaid reimbursement for doulas and birthing people have access, especially Black women and women of color, that we will see a significant decrease in our maternal mortality rate and infant mortality rate, because we see it across the country where these things have already been implemented. So those are just some of the things that I've been able to work on. And there's some companion bills over in the Senate, and been happy to work with Senator Burke, as well as Senator Antonio, Senator Maharath, and Senator Kunze on that legislation. I'm really grateful for them and their support.
Thanks so much, Representative. You put forth a very robust agenda in terms of enacting and really operationalizing policy and the type of evaluation needed to advance equitable outcomes. So thank you so much for sharing today. Senator Burke, in your role as chair of the Health, Human Services and Medicaid Committee, you've been able to keep a pulse on so many of the systems that serve our young children and families. Can you share some committee work for which you're really proud that's advanced equitable outcomes for young children?
Sure, absolutely. You know, I'll go back to one of the earlier ones I did back in the Ohio House, right, nearly a decade ago. And that was simply changing the data flow for free and reduced lunches. We used to only transmit that data in July, and that was it, once a year. And of course, we had a recession, and there were these kids who probably qualified for Medicaid and other services, but yet the school district was not aware they qualified for a free or reduced lunch and breakfast. While I'm not the education guru, I have heard over and over again that when you feed a child, they do better in school. So why wouldn't we communicate this on at least a monthly basis to schools? We put that in a budget bill and it actually passed. Seemed like a weird thing for Republicans to do. It's not like any of these issues are turf related, right? But people sometimes pick and choose their areas of interest, and sometimes with Republicans, it's hard to discuss these issues. I don't know why that is, but we all want a good outcome. Why not invest in it? You know, the second thing I think I do, and Representative Crawley touched on it, is support my colleagues, right? Going back to Shannon Jones and Charlita Tavares, who did so much on infant mortality. You know, we just passed a bill that the representative worked on. Nickie, Antonio, and I have worked together for years on issues. And, you know, you don't have to be the wizard on the issues, but you do have to kind of recognize good ideas when you see them and support your friends to get them across the line. So certainly a lot to work on in the General Assembly, but I have found supporting my colleagues, and both my colleagues here that you have today are women, statesmen in their own rights, because they're willing to compromise on issues to get that ball across the line. And most recently, Representative talked about her doula bill. I have found the Lord hasn't given me a lot of gifts, but writing regulatory bills is one of them. So creating a structure where doulas actually have a profession in the state of Ohio, I think is probably one of the first in the country. So granted, like your quote said earlier, it's a millimeter of progress, but you know what? It's progress. So supporting our friends that actually do good work is equally as important as having a great idea yourself.
Thanks so much, Senator Burke. Senator Antonio, given your long history of experience and perspective on equity in Northeast Ohio and across the state, as we engage in policy and advocacy to advance equitable outcomes for young children and families, where do you see an area of really great opportunity in this time? And what do you see as the greatest challenge to that opportunity?
Yeah. Well, first of all, both of my colleagues, as you can see, we are lucky in the state of Ohio that we do have the opportunity to work across the aisle on as Senator Burke said, good ideas. And I can't say enough about the work that Representative Crawley's done as a freshman legislator. She just came in and had a list of things that she wanted to address, and she's been putting pen to paper and doing that. And we have a number of her bills that are companion bills over in the Senate. And we've been trying to move that work forward, but at the core, and I think what the biggest challenge is something we started with in terms of there's a Senate resolution, a companion resolution stating that racism is a public health crisis in the state of Ohio. It's SCR 14 in the Senate, same language as in the House. And I think that gets to the core of why it's so difficult to pass some policy changes, because we have to educate a group of people that have not had the lived experience of some folks, and be able to understand, the majority of our legislative bodies in both the House and the Senate have not experienced racism, they don't know what it's like to have a single mom who can't get credit like I did when I was a kid, and watch that happen in the late 60s when she couldn't apply for credit and couldn't get a lot of things done, where we had our heat and light threatened to be turned off all the time. But I still had an advantage as someone who's white. And I knew that going forward. I learned that going forward. And I look back on that now. We have to be able to be allies, to be doing this work together. One of the most amazing things that I think happened in the Senate, to Senator Burke's leadership and credit, is we had hearings on that resolution declaring racism a public health crisis in the state of Ohio. And we heard from people, they came in and talked about the lack of policy, the lack of resources and what happens, and the lack of someone hearing them and listening to them when they go to the doctor. We've heard Venus Williams say that, the famous tennis player, that the same thing happened to her. So we know this crosses economic lines, professional lines, all kinds of things. We can't turn our backs and say that we really don't want to understand that this is an issue. It is important. And if we're going to make a change in the policy for our families across the state of Ohio, the policymakers have to have an understanding. Now, I will tell you that I have belief and faith that that can happen. I saw the change, and Senator Burke was doing the work with me. As we addressed the opioid crisis a number of years ago, we started with a conversation that most people believed, most of our policymakers believed, it was, kind of a character flaw, that people had fallen into drug use and addiction, and that if they, as Senator Crowley said, would just pull themselves up by their bootstraps, they could change it. And we started doing a deep dive into that, and the majority of our colleagues came to the understanding, with a whole lot of education and information and personal stories from people across the state of Ohio, they got to the point where they believe and they understand now that addiction is an illness. It is something that can be recovered from, but that a whole lot of resources and work needs to go into helping that happen, that it doesn't just automatically happen. And so I believe, because we've had that experience, that it's also possible for our colleagues to understand that this crisis, really, that we're facing with our families is in order to provide that level playing field for our children and our families across the state of Ohio, that our policymakers have to understand, and they can understand, but they're going to need that information. Your report helps us make the case, have those discussions, that it's not about character failing. It's not because people don't want to work, seek better, make a better life for their families. It's because the cards are stacked against them starting out. And we have the opportunity to change that through policy. Many of the policies that Representative Crowley talked about, if we do those are incremental steps to make positive change and to create resources. We also have a budget, and it has to be a priority for us. We talk about the budget being a moral document, and I believe that, absolutely. It shows what the priorities of a state are. And I believe that in this next budget, along with things like being able to pay for doulas through the Medicaid budget and some other things, that there are things that we can do to have that budget reflect the priorities of the state. And those priorities have to be our children, our babies, our mothers, especially in communities of color, who need that additional hand up in order for them to be able to truly succeed. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I know we're running up against time, and Senator Antonio, you really got to our next question as well. So I'll just ask Senator Burke and Senator Crawley to close us out briefly with some comments to your thoughts on what will it take of individuals, of policymakers, and of advocates. What would you ask of advocates to advance equitable outcomes for kids through your work?
I'll jump in and let Senator or Representative Crawley. I'm jumping the gun on your representatives. But I was thinking, and I guess the hearings that we've had on SCR 14 in the Senate, and I would like to have more. But even going back to infant mortality with Senator Jones and Tavares, is learning about an issue and having the courage to ask, why is that? Right? My Senate district, where I grew up, is different than some of the places where we really experience infant mortality. I'm obviously not a female, and I don't live in a city, but I do have the courage to ask my colleagues or go to places to figure out why that is, right? Because it doesn't seem fair. But I've always felt you can never craft a solution until you understand the problem. And I've got to go touch that. And somebody has to show me why that is. And when you do that, then I'm actually able to come back with a policy that works. That also takes place in person. The SCR 14 hearings we had. People come, not because they were wanting to riot or do these other crazy things you see in the news. They had actual personal stories that impacted themselves, but they weren't talking about themselves. They were talking about their children and their grandchildren and the need and the prospect that this state and this country gives people. And I think about Ohio and where we've been on this issue historically. It's an ongoing equation, right? And we've always been on the right side of the equation. But I guess what inspires me about SCR 14 is, are we going to stay on the right side of that equation? And how do we get to tomorrow is a better place from where we are today. And that takes courage, right? And maybe it's not always the right words or the right question, but it's the ability just to simply engage, right? And to know I don't know everything, but I do believe, like I said in the beginning, that every child in the state should start off in the same starting blocks and be given the same opportunity. That to me is what makes a great state. I can't control the outcome, but I can control the opportunity. And policies that craft that are the policies I want to be on. And I'll just close on this quote. It hangs in my office, and it's from a British Irish statesman, like hundreds of years ago, Edmund Burke. There's no greater sin than he who does nothing because he could only do a little. So when I touch these issues, if I can help even somehow, some way to make it better, and if everybody did that who follows me, what a great state we'd have in the long run. So thanks for having me on today.
Thanks so much, Senator. And our crowd is hanging on because we've had such a fantastic panel. Please, Representative Crawley, close us out with some short final comments. And I have a call to action on declaring racism for public health crisis that I want to share with our audience today. Representative?
Absolutely. Thank you again. And so I would just say, as Senator Burke said, trying to continue the work that Senator Tavares and Senator Jones started. Senator Tavares is a mentor to me. And so, I know she's been out there continuing to advocate as Shannon has, been advocating too. And so I would just say that what we need is more people advocating and more people who are willing to be co-conspirators in the effort and the movement to dismantle racism. And for our providers out there, whether there's policies that have already been introduced that are good and would be impactful, please let us know. Let the chairs of the committees know that you want to see this moved or you would like a hearing on it. We're going into lame duck, but it still doesn't mean that we just have to sit on the sidelines and wait until a new term. That the work needs to be done and it needs to continue. We don't have time to sit idly by. That's what I would ask of, everyone who's listening in or joining this call is to, in some way, shape, or form, lift up SCR 14 and HCR 31, as well as, bring whatever stories that you have from your community, whether it's dealing with racism, whether it's dealing with education and how we have not funded it, how we don't have universal pre-K and all-day kindergarten, and how that's an economic issue and a workforce development issue. And we would like every child that goes into kindergarten to be ready and ready for third grade reading guarantee. And we know that starts with early childhood and making sure they have access to quality. Bring those stories and that perspective to us and to some of my colleagues who may not understand and making it real for them. And I just want to say thank you for all the work that you all continue to do and lean on me to be a resource if I could be helpful in any way. But you are making a difference in our next generation, and I just appreciate you and thank you for that.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our panelists today. The comments that are coming through are really encouraging. I think that you all have inspired hope. And we at Groundwork want to be co-conspirators with you, Representative Crawley, Senator Burke, Senator Antonio, so thank you. We have a lot of work ahead. We can't do it alone. We've asked all of you on the line to join us. And I want to make sure that you engage in one small way today, and that is to participate in our advocacy action alert to tell your policymakers, tell your state senators, your state representatives, that we have to address structural racism head on. And we have specifically designed a campaign for you. You can view it on the screen here, and we are sharing the link with you in the chat box. It will, if you engage with us, it will send messages to both your state and federal representatives in the Ohio Senate, the Ohio House, and Congress, to encourage them to declare racism as a public health crisis. And Groundwork provided testimony on Senate Concurrent Resolution 14. We'll share that in the chat box with you as well. And Representative Crawley as a sponsor of the House HCR 31. There's also a federal companion to these efforts in each Chamber of Commerce. So please, there is a lot of work to be done, and we need all of you at the table, but take 2 minutes to do this today and act to advance equitable outcomes for young children by demanding that our policymakers, like those that you have heard from on this panel today, is willing to join all of us alongside individuals and communities across the state to challenge personal and institutional assumptions about race and racism and act urgently to dismantle structural racism in the walls of the State House and the systems, agencies, and institutions that serve Ohio's youngest children, and especially Black children and their families. Thank you very much for your time. We still have so many on the line, so thank you again to all of you, and take care.